Okay, the year's best sports writing 2021, edited and with an introduction by Glenn Stout, published by Triumph Books in 2021. There's 25 pieces in this book of sports journalism, plus the essay by Glenn Stout. I'm going to focus mainly on the memoir. I've been curious about Glenn Stout since 1999 when the book, The Best American Sports Writing of the Century, came out, which he edited with David Halberstam. He edited the series, the Best American series, 10 years before that, and then it ended up doing it for 20 more years, for 30 years in total, before it switched this year to Triumph Books. He's never made the final selections before. He's always been the series editor. There's been another guest editor. This is the first year he's made the final selections. What are his criteria? Basically, in his words, he's looking for stories that reading once, he wants to read again and share with friends. A great criteria. Also, he says that the value of writing comes from the degree it enables us to know each other. A fantastic also way to describe the value of memoir. This book, obviously, because all of the pieces were published in 2020, there's a feel of the pandemic and of racial strife and gender and racial barriers because of the George Floyd killing and the Me Too movement. This book could work as like an artifact of the times because, as Glenn Stout says, it's like, sports is not only current events, it's also a kind of reflection of current events. So the book has that merit beyond what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, the book leads off with a piece called Walk, Run, or Wheelbarrow by Allison Glock, originally published in espnW. Allison Glock is home, working from home during the pandemic. Her two daughters are home. It's an awkward situation. They're all bumping into each other all day long. It's about how, Allison Glock goes out for walks and her daughters run, even though they don't want to run. And it's sort of metaphorically about how during the pandemic, when we're stuck at home, how we kind of like spun our wheels to try to convince ourselves with our bodies that we were kind of moving forward while the pandemic kind of stagnated everything. It's a kind of pastiche of moments from her family life, friends, subjects she's written about. Some of these moments are more digested than others, but the tone is right, and I think it really speaks to how many of us felt during the pandemic. Okay, there's a piece in the book called What Happens When Two Strangers Trust the Rides of Their Lives to the Magic of the Universe by Kim Cross, originally published in Bicylcing. This is not memoir, but I'm pointing it out for a specific reason. It's about these two guys, one guy named Leon from Britain, and another guy named Noel from the US. Their names are palindromes, meaning that Noel is Leon spelled backwards and Leon is Noel spelled backwards. That comes into the piece. Anyway, these two guys begin bicycle trips randomly from different points in the world. One I think is in South Korea, another is in Lisbon, Portugal, and each of them rides more than like 10,000 miles, and they meet by happenstance in the desert in Kazakhstan. These are like, they're living the culminating experiences of their lives. They're 26 years old. And I mean, this piece has got more adventure in it than most travel books. It's both deep and light. This woman is a talent. There's no doubt about it. And it kind of ends on this kind of really beautiful anticlimactic note that nothing they've done in their lives has ever kind of lived up to this particular moment in their lives or this trip that they made. I'm going to come back to this later because I think it speaks toward what great writing can do. Okay, there's a piece called The Ramshackle Garden of Affection by Ross Gay and Noah Davis. It was originally published in The Sun. Noah Davis was a basketball player at Seton Hall, and then he went to get his MFA at the University of Indiana, where Ross Gay was his teacher in poetry. They ended up playing pickup basketball together and decided to write letters back and forth to each other. And they wrote this kind of epistolary piece. I've never read anything like it before. I laughed out loud a few times. It's a kind of, they wax poetic. Sometimes I wonder if it's a kind of send-up of poetic language and tropes. But it's also kind of droll trash talking. It's about camaraderie. They kind of philosophize. Apparently there's a whole book of this book worth of letters like this. Personally, I got just enough with this piece, but it's definitely recommendable. Okay, there's a piece called The Inheritance of Archie Manning by Wright Thompson, originally published in ESPN. I think the acid test for a great feature piece about a celebrity is if you don't know anything about the celebrity, if you've never seen his glory on the field and you're still fascinated by the piece, then you know it's great. I don't think this piece meets that standard. I was bored at times. Also, Wright Thompson brings himself into the piece. I'm not really sure why. I don't think it does anything to make the piece better. I think that part could have been cut out. However, I think the piece is absolutely worth it for a point where Wright Thompson writes about how when Archie Manning is a college kid and he returns home to Drew, Mississippi, he finds his father having blown his head off with a shotgun on his bed. And it's after that, his junior year at Ole Miss, where his career as a football player is kind of launched. That piece, that part of the piece is absolutely fascinating. It makes the read worth it. Okay, The Most Magical Place on Earth by Taylor Rooks, originally published in GQ magazine. It's about the 2020 NBA Finals, which took place down in Disney World, where 300 basketball players, NBA players, went down to play the playoffs, basically isolated from everyone else, even their families. Maybe a few sports reporters were down there. It's a bit of a puff piece. Taylor Rooks says nothing negative about the NBA players. Maybe you read between the lines that they drink too much, that's all they care about after games is to go back to the hotel and have cocktails. I kind of wish she had written about herself. I mean, what was it like for her? I mean, this beautiful young black woman, right? I think she's the niece of Lou Brock, the great base stealer from the St. Louis Cardinals. What was it like for her to live for 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it was down there among all these superstars? Why didn't she write about herself in this piece? That would have given it an edge. Okay, there's the Confederate flag is finally gone at NASCAR races, and I Won't Miss It for a Second by Ryan McGee, originally published in ESPN. Fascinating piece to me because it's kind of like a purification for the sins of his fathers. I don't know if that was his conscious intention, but that's what made the piece fascinating to me. It was uncomfortable to read in places in a good way. He comes from a deep Southern pedigree and lineage. His ancestors were slave owners, and I think this piece was a way for him to get the monkey off his back and to sort of come clean about it. He also makes a very, very convincing case about why there is absolutely no excuse to hang the Confederate flag at NASCAR races, but maybe his unconscious intentions were more fascinating to me than his conscious ones. Okay, 12 Minutes in a Life by Mitchell S. Jackson, originally published in Runner's World. Maybe the best piece in this book, maybe the most important. It's about the murder of Ahmaud Marquez Arbery. He goes for a jog in the suburbs of Georgia, sees a house under construction, goes in the house to check it out. We've all done that. I've done that. Leaves, runs, takes nothing. A couple neighbors see him. They pursue him in their pickup trucks and end up shooting him dead on the street with a shotgun. It goes to show, according to the writer, how running or jogging is an unaffordable hazard for scores of people who ain't white. Also how blacks ain't never owned the same freedom of movement as whites. I mean, if you doubted that before, after reading this piece, you will certainly be convinced. I mean, the writer does an unbelievable job bringing this kid to life so that you feel absolute devastation that he died. The murder scene, when he gets killed, is written with such detail, it's mind-blowing. Also, he brings himself into it, Mitchell S. Jackson, to show how his life mirrors this kid's life to an extent that you can see what maybe this kid might have become if he had been allowed to live. Yeah, I mean, couldn't be better. Okay, how Kobe Bryant's death brought Bobby McIlvaine, an athlete, a scholar, the friend I should have known better, back to life, by Mike Cielski, originally published in the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's about how these 5 minutes of lost videotape about a high school game in which Kobe Bryant was a freshman and Bobby McIlvaine, who ended up dying in the 9/11 attacks, are playing together. How this piece of tape sort of brought this kid back to life, to the people who loved him, family and friends. I'm not going to ruin it, but there's a piece at the end where he's watching the tape and the writer says he will never miss again. He's shooting a jump shot. And it made me think of the poem by John Keats, Ode on a Grecian Urn, where I think the line is, bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. Forever wilt thou love and she be fair. You know, it's like eternal, because there it is on videotape. I mean, that is literature, right? When a piece makes you think about a work of art. Okay, The Bubble of a Dream, written by Peter Bromka, originally published in Medium. Easily one of the 2 or 3 best pieces in this book. It's about the writer deciding at 38 years old that he wants to become an Olympic qualifier in the marathon. And he fails at his goal, I mean, by seconds. And it ends up becoming this kind of chronicle of emotional ups and downs, of self-doubt, of pep talks to himself, of setting impossible goals. I mean, it's about him wanting something so much but not getting it. I mean, he runs the best race of his life, his fastest possible time, and it ends up being a failure. So it's about how sports are about embracing failure. I mean, if I were going to sum this piece up in 5 words, I would say that it's like David Goggins for deep thinkers. I mean, what does it mean when you give absolutely everything of yourself and you don't get what you want? It's both kind of sobering and inspiring, sad and uplifting at the same time. Memoir at its best. Okay, Out There on Not Finishing, written by Devin Kelly, originally published in Long Reads. It's about ultramarathons. This guy's an ultramarathoner. It's another piece of pure memoir. He kind of waxes philosophical on the idea of whether it's about doing something or about finishing something. And he talks about how ultramarathons, which are at least 100-mile long races, this is a metaphor actualized of that idea. Writing could also be a metaphor actualized of that idea. Perhaps he philosophizes too much. He's a bit preachy. He's a bit gushy and overbearing about what transcendental truth is, which of course is different for each person and changes according to the moment. This is where I want to bring back Kim Cross's piece about the 2 guys cycling across the country and meeting in the middle. All of the questions that Devin Kelly directly lays out for us are all indirectly laid out by Kim Cross in her piece. Personally, I prefer to come up with those questions myself rather than having them sort of like given to me on a platter like Devin Kelly does. But again, this is personal taste. So, do I recommend this book? Absolutely. It's a smorgasbord of good writing. And as I say, your favorite piece might not even be one of the pieces that I've talked about in this video. Glenn Stout has done a yeoman's job of putting this thing together for 30 years. Even if he had just done this volume, it would have been a yeoman's job. Anyway, read it.